There are moments, and they come most often in that thin, liquid space between waking and sleep, when you become aware that something immense has been here before you. Not a thought exactly. More like a pressure, a presence beneath the ordinary surface of things, the way deep water holds cold long after the surface has warmed in the summer sun. Tonight, we are going to follow that feeling, somewhere on this earth, in a valley that has known the weight of centuries the way most places know only the weather. There are stones, not stones the way a garden has stones, or a riverbed, or a forgotten grave. These are stones of a scale so absolute that the human mind, encountering them for the first time, does not reach for the word stone at all. It reaches for words like impossible, words like why, words that open at the bottom into silence. Imagine a single block of limestone, 19 meters long, 4 meters tall, 4 meters deep, weighing as much as 800 fully loaded freight cars, pressed together into a single piece of earth that once breathed and grew and held the rain. And yet it was placed with the precision of a watchmaker, into a wall that has stood longer than most of what we call civilization, longer than the Roman Empire that built above it, longer than the Latin language, longer than the memory of the people who placed it, whose names the stone does not carry and has never chosen to reveal. Who placed it there? With what tools, what knowledge, what understanding of the relationship between human will and the indifferent weight of the physical world? And why? Why, in every corner of this dreaming planet, did our ancestors look at the raw body of the earth and feel compelled to lift it, to move it, to arrange it into something that would outlast everything they knew? Their names, their gods, their very language? You are listening to Midnight Sleep Chronicles, and tonight our archives open onto one of the oldest questions the human heart has ever carried close to its chest. The shadow of giants, the memory of stone, and the strange, aching reason we have always built for eternity. Let yourself settle now. Feel the weight of your own body, the comfortable, familiar heaviness of it, and let the day begin to release its hold on you. We are going somewhere very old, and very quiet, and very deep. The path there runs through the softest and most patient part of the mind. If there is something on the surface of your thoughts right now, a worry, a to-do, a conversation replaying itself, let it drift. It will be here when you return. For now, we are going somewhere the ordinary noise of things cannot follow. We begin. Close your eyes and try to feel the Bekaa Valley before you see it. It arrives first as warmth, a dry, ancient warmth that has nothing to do with the season and everything to do with accumulated time. The valley lies in what is now Lebanon, but is cradled between two mountain ranges whose names have changed a dozen times across the centuries. The Anti-Lebanon Range to the east, the Lebanon Range to the west. Between them, this long, fertile corridor that has carried every civilization the Eastern Mediterranean ever produced. Phoenicians walking here with cedar and purple dye, Romans with wine and ambition, Crusaders with armor that caught the light of a sun that had been shining on this valley for 10,000 years before they arrived. The land smells of limestone, dust, and wild thyme. The light, even at dusk, even in memory, has a particular quality. Golden, but not soft. Precise. The way the light falls in places where the air is very clear and the altitude is just high enough to feel thin. And everything you see seems to be presenting itself with unusual clarity, as though the world here has decided to be especially visible. And then the platform rises. It emerges from the valley floor the way all truly enormous things emerge, not suddenly but gradually, the way the full scale of a mountain only becomes clear when you are close enough that it has begun to fill the upper half of your vision. The Temple of Jupiter was built here by the Romans in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era, and 6 of its enormous columns still stand, visible for miles in every direction. But the Romans did not begin this place. They inherited it. They built their magnificent temple on top of a foundation that was already here, already ancient, already presenting the same question it presents today. The Baalbek stones, the trilithon, 3 horizontal blocks laid end to end in the western retaining wall, are perhaps the most discussed objects in the archaeology of impossible engineering. Each one is 19 meters long, 4.2 meters high, 3.6 meters deep. Each one weighs between 750 and 800 tons. The layer of supporting stones beneath them, the courses that carry the trilithon blocks, contain stones of their own that weigh approximately 350 tons each and are roughly 11 meters wide. These are not the small, manageable stones of ordinary construction. These are not the bricks that the Romans used for their roads and aqueducts. These are objects of a scale that places them outside the ordinary vocabulary of human building. To understand what 800 tons means in terms you can hold in your body. The largest crane currently operating on Earth. A machine so large that it requires specialized transport, a dedicated team of engineers, and months of setup time before it can begin to lift, can hoist approximately 2,000 tons. So, a modern crane, the most powerful thing we have built for the purpose of lifting, could move one of these blocks, could lift it, could place it, but only barely. And with the full weight of modern industrial civilization behind it, the steel, the hydraulics, the computerized controls, the diesel fuel, the entire chain of production that makes such a machine possible. The trilithon blocks were placed without any of that. They were placed in a time before diesel, before steel, before hydraulics, before the concept of engineering as a discipline distinct from craft. And they were placed with a precision that the largest modern crane would struggle to match. The joints between the stones, surfaces that were worked by hand, shaped by tools we can partially reconstruct, are so close that a sheet of paper cannot be pressed between them. Not approximately close, not almost touching. Touching, continuously, along the entire length of the contact surface. This is the thing that makes engineers grow quiet. In the quarry, 800 meters from the temple site, barely half a mile, a distance you could walk in under 10 minutes, the limestone hillside still holds its largest secrets in plain sight. Hajar el-Hibla, the stone of the pregnant woman, lies where it was left, partially separated from the bedrock, fully shaped on most of its surfaces, oriented toward the construction site as though ready to travel. It is 20 meters long. It weighs approximately 1,000 tons. And beside it, partially buried beneath it, lies the stone discovered in 2014 by archaeologists from the German Archaeological Institute. This is the stone they call simply the Forgotten Stone. Its estimated weight is 1,650 tons. It is the largest known worked stone in the recorded history of human civilization. It lies in the earth, still wearing the tool marks of its making, still pointed toward a wall it never reached. No one knows why these stones were abandoned. The quarry was active, the work was progressing, the stones were ready, and then nothing. The work stopped. The tools went silent. The stones stayed where they were, and the centuries moved over them, and the empires came and went, and eventually the people called archaeologists arrived with their instruments and their notebooks and their carefully calibrated uncertainty, and the stones were still there. still asking the same question they had always been asking. What happened here? The official explanation for how the trilithon blocks were moved from quarry to platform involves what archaeologists call simple machines: wooden rollers, earthen ramps, sledges, rope, the coordinated muscle of very large numbers of human beings. French archaeologist Jean-Pierre Adam studied this question rigorously in 1977, filling 30 pages of Syria, one of the field's most respected journals, with physics and engineering calculations of great precision. His conclusion: that a block of 400 tons, roughly half the size of a trilithon stone, could be moved using a system of wooden rollers and capstans by approximately 512 men working in careful coordination on sufficiently prepared ground over a sufficient period of time. His paper does not explain how the full-sized blocks were raised into their final positions, not because he was careless, because the question of final placement, of how an 800-ton block was not merely transported across 800 meters of uneven terrain, but lifted and set with the precision of a watchmaker's finest work, remains, after all the calculations and all the thoughtful, careful scholarship, genuinely open. The precision cannot be fully accounted for by any combination of the tools and methods we know were available. Something in the explanatory chain is missing. What is missing is not necessarily miraculous. It may be simply a technique that was lost, a specific method of using leverage, counterbalance, wedge, or some other mechanical principle that was so thoroughly embedded in the practice of a culture that it was never written down, never transmitted as explicit knowledge, and therefore vanished when the culture that held it was dispersed or absorbed or simply changed into something else. Lost knowledge is not the same as impossible knowledge. The steam engine was impossible until it was not. Antibiotics were impossible until they were not. Flight was impossible until, quite suddenly, it was not. The knowledge may be recoverable. We may simply not have found it yet. But Baalbek and Puma Punku are not alone in holding this particular quality of silence. The silence of something made at a scale and precision that exceeds what we can fully account for. There are the stones of Sacsayhuaman, on the hill above the Inca city of Cusco in Peru. The outer walls of this ceremonial complex are built from stones of enormous size, the largest weighing more than 300 tons, fitted together in a style that the Inca themselves, centuries later, described as the work of Viracocha, the creator god, who shaped the stones using divine power before the human world began. The stones are not squared and regular, the way efficient construction usually demands. They are polygonal, many-sided, each one a different shape. And they are fitted together so that every surface matches the adjacent surface perfectly, the irregular boundary between them sealed without mortar, to a tightness that has survived centuries of Andean earthquakes that toppled Spanish colonial buildings built of regular, mortared stone right beside them. Engineers studying Sacsayhuaman have noted something that at first seems inefficient, but on reflection appears to be deliberate. The irregular, multi-sided fitting method is actually superior to regular rectangular blocks for earthquake resistance. When the ground moves, a rectangular wall transmits force uniformly and can fail at a single weak point. A polygonal fitted wall distributes force across multiple irregular contact surfaces, each one at a different angle, so no single force vector can find a straight path through the wall. The Andean builders, working with hand tools in an age without seismographic equipment, created a structural engineering solution that modern architects have had to rediscover using computers and materials science. They knew something about the relationship between complexity and stability that we are still in the process of understanding. There is Gobekli Tepe, in what is now southeastern Turkey, on a hilltop in the upper reaches of the Fertile Crescent. This site, excavated beginning in 1994 by the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, has quietly rewritten several important chapters of human prehistory. The T-shaped limestone pillars of Gobekli Tepe, some of them 6 meters tall, some weighing more than 20 tons, are arranged in circular enclosures of clear ritual intent. They are carved with images of animals: foxes, vultures, scorpions, cranes, lions, snakes. The carvings are accomplished and assured, produced by hands that had clearly been doing this work for a long time, that moved with the confidence of practitioners in a mature tradition. And Gobekli Tepe predates agriculture. It predates pottery. It predates the invention of the wheel. The pillar builders of this hilltop site were hunter-gatherers. They had no cities, no centralized administration, no surplus grain economy of the kind that archaeologists have traditionally believed was a prerequisite for the kind of organized, long-term, labor-intensive construction that building Gobekli Tepe would have required. They should not, by the established model of human cultural development, have been capable of this. They were capable of this. Klaus Schmidt died before he could complete the excavation. The site is enormous. The visible portion may be only a small fraction of what lies buried. And at a certain point in its history, deliberately and for reasons that remain unclear, the builders of Gobekli Tepe buried the entire complex under tons of rubble and walked away, sealed it, preserved it, as though they understood that what they had made was too important to leave exposed to the ordinary wear of time. As though they were leaving it for someone specific, someone they could not see yet, someone who would come later and have the instruments to understand what they had made. We are those instruments. And on the Salisbury Plain of southern England, where the grass is very green and the light changes 20 times in a single afternoon, and the horizon seems both very close and very far in the way of flat landscapes near large bodies of water. Stonehenge, the most famous stone circle on Earth, and still, after more than a century of intensive archaeological study, one of the most mysterious. The sarsen stones, the large upright stones and their horizontal lintels, were quarried at Marlborough Downs, approximately 25 kilometers north of the site. Each one weighs an average of 25 tons. The blue stones, smaller, darker stones from Wales, from the Preseli Hills specifically, were transported approximately 250 kilometers from their quarry to their final positions. 250 kilometers in the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, without wheeled vehicles, without horses large enough to be used as draft animals, through terrain that includes both sea and mountain. Why blue stones from Wales specifically? Why not local stone? Why not the nearest available stone of adequate quality? Because the builders knew what they were doing. Chemical analysis has confirmed that the blue stones originated in specific outcroppings in the Preseli Hills that were known and used long before Stonehenge was built. The builders traveled to that specific location, quarried that specific stone, and transported it across a distance that represents an extraordinary commitment of collective effort. They had a reason. The reason has not yet been fully recovered. What has been recovered, with increasing precision as measurement technology has improved, is the astronomical function of the site. The main axis of Stonehenge aligns with the rising sun of the summer solstice and the setting sun of the winter solstice. Other alignments within the complex correspond to moonrise, moonset, and specific astronomical events of the 18.6-year lunar cycle. The builders of Stonehenge were making an instrument, a calendar a calendar that also mapped the longer cycles of the moon, a machine for tracking time not in days, but in years and decades, and the slow, planetary rhythms that govern the deeper seasons of the Earth. They were not doing this for practical agriculture alone, though astronomical knowledge and successful agriculture are not unrelated and should not be separated too quickly. They were doing it because the movements of the sun and moon and the patterns they trace on the landscape were meaningful in a way that required permanent marking. They were making the sky's writing legible on the Earth's surface, translating the language of celestial time into the language of stone. Someone stood inside that circle on a specific morning, in a specific year, in the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, and watched the solstice sunrise come through the heelstone and illuminate the altar stone in exactly the way the builders had designed it to do. And they knew that the work had been correct, that the understanding was right, that they had successfully translated what the sky was saying into a form that would last. We can stand in that same position today and watch the same light arrive. The translation held. Now let your sense of place dissolve gently, not a jarring transition, but a slow exhale, the way one landscape gives way to another in a dream, without the awkward mechanics of actual travel. And allow yourself to arrive in the high Bolivian altiplano. The air is thinner here, 3,800 meters above the sea. The sky at this altitude has a quality you do not find at lower elevations, a darkness even in daylight, as though the atmosphere's thin upper layer is giving you a view of what lies beyond it. Lake Titicaca shimmers to the north, the largest high-altitude lake on Earth, its surface catching light in a way that makes it seem less like water and more like a mirror held by the landscape for the sky's own contemplation. You are at Puma Punku, Gate of the Puma, part of the larger Tiwanaku complex, a site that has been dated by multiple independent methods: carbon analysis, archaeomagnetism, the specific metal alloys found in tool fragments, the iconographic development of the carvings, to approximately 536 years after the Common Era, not inconceivably old. The Roman Empire was still nominally functioning when the first stones were laid here. But the age of Puma Punku is not its most remarkable quality. The stones were brought here from 2 quarries, red sandstone from a site 10 kilometers away, a distance that seems manageable until you consider that the largest sandstone block weighs 131 tons, that the terrain between quarry and construction site includes significant gradient changes, and that the Tiwanaku civilization had no wheeled vehicles, no horses, no draft animals larger than a llama carrying perhaps 30 kilograms. The andesite, the harder volcanic stone used for the most detailed carvings, came from the Copacabana Peninsula across Lake Titicaca, 90 kilometers away. 90 kilometers of water, then land, then altitude. Andesite is a dark, dense volcanic rock that ranks high on the Mohs hardness scale, harder than most metals, significantly harder than the stones available to work it. To shape andesite precisely requires either exceptional patience with stone tools, or tools made of materials harder than andesite, or something else entirely that we have not fully understood. The H-blocks of Puma Punku are the objects that most resist conventional explanation. There are approximately 80 of them. They are modular, designed to fit together in multiple configurations, like components of a system rather than unique handcrafted objects. Each H-block has roughly 80 distinct faces and surfaces. The right angles are exact. The inside surfaces are flat in a way that requires either an extraordinary degree of controlled hand grinding or a technique we have not identified. The grooves, cut with non-parallel walls, creating what modern joiners call a dovetail connection, would lock the blocks into each other and into the walls with a mechanical precision that mortar could not have improved. The researcher Claire Nair spent 40 hours carving a small section of this style of design, using the tools that would have been available to the Tiwanaku people. Stone hammers, grinding stones, sand as an abrasive. She succeeded in reproducing the basic pattern. What she could not fully reproduce, even after 40 hours, was the consistent flatness of the interior surfaces. The stones at Puma Punku have this flatness everywhere, at every scale, on every surface that was meant to connect to another surface. And threaded through the construction of Puma Punku, binding the stones together at their joints, are metal clamps, poured molten into channels cut specifically to receive them, then allowed to cool and solidify in play. The same technique? The same essential idea. It appears at Delphi, in ancient Greece, in multiple sites across Egypt, in Cambodia, at the temples of Angkor, in Sardinia, in sites across the Middle East, different continents, different languages, different gods. The same technical solution to the same engineering problem, deployed by cultures that had no known contact with one another. Either this is convergent invention, the same good idea occurring independently in multiple places, the way agriculture and writing appear to have developed independently in multiple locations. Or there is something connecting these sites and cultures that the current map of ancient history has not yet found a place for. Puma Punku was abandoned before it was finished. Something happened. The current best theory involves a catastrophic earthquake accompanied by a wave from Lake Titicaca, around the time the Tiwanaku civilization as a whole began its collapse, driven by a prolonged drought that made the massive crop yields required to sustain their population impossible. The people scattered. The knowledge scattered with them. The stones remained, overturned and disordered, as though a very large hand had swept across a table in anger or grief. When the Inca arrived, centuries later, they found the ruins, did not claim them as their own ancestors' work. Their kings, when asked by the Spanish who had built this place, said, "The gods," in one night. Even a king whose entire identity depended on the power and genius of his civilization did not reach for a human explanation for Puma Punku. The stones carry the weight of that silence, too. There is a story told in the Bekaa Valley about the stone of the pregnant woman. And it begins, as so many of the oldest stories begin, with a bargain. A woman knew the secret. She knew how to move the great stones. The secret that had come to her through some grace or inheritance or discovery that the ordinary categories of the world could not quite hold. She offered to share this knowledge with the people of the valley, but only on one condition: that they care for her, feed her, tend to her, until she gave birth. The people agreed. They fed her generously for the months of her carrying. They attended to her with the diligence due to someone who carried something precious, the child and the secret both. And when at last the labor came and passed, and the child arrived in the world, the woman smiled at the people gathered around her. And then she closed her eyes and carried the secret away with her into whatever country lies on the other side of breathing. The stone remained in the quarry. There is a second version, in which it is not a woman, but a pregnant jinn. One of those beings from the liminal space between the human world and whatever else is out there. Neither angel nor demon. Capable of moving between the visible and the invisible with an ease that ordinary creatures cannot manage. In this version, the jinn were assigned the task of quarrying and moving the great stones. They worked through the nights, the half-dark, the hours when the boundary between worlds is thinnest and such beings are most comfortable. But something happened, as it always does in these stories. The dawn came early, or a prayer was said that called them back, or the human world changed in a way that made their continued presence in it untenable. They stopped mid-task. The stone stayed where it was, half freed from the earth, forever in the posture of a journey it never completed. Both versions of this story are doing something very specific. They are acknowledging, with a kind of serene and undefended honesty, that there are things in the human record that ordinary human hands cannot fully account for. And rather than construct a lie that fits inside the boundaries of the explainable, the tradition reaches for a frame that is larger. It reaches for the liminal, for beings that exist at the permeable edge between what we understand and what we can feel, but not quite grasp. This is not unique to Lebanon. Wherever megaliths exist on this earth, and they exist on every inhabited continent, placed in their positions, across a span of thousands of years by dozens of cultures, with no known connection to one another. An accompanying tradition exists that attributes the construction to something larger than ordinary human agency. The stories do not all say the same thing. They carry different names, different cosmologies, different emotional textures, but they circle the same center. In ancient Greece, the Cyclopes were the great builders of the pre-Olympian world. Children of Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. These one-eyed craftsmen worked at scales and to standards that the human builders who came after them could only approximate. They forged the thunderbolts of Zeus from raw lightning. They shaped the trident of Poseidon from the pressure of deep water. They built walls of stones so enormous that when later Greeks encountered the ancient fortifications of Mycenae and Tiryns, enormous, irregular polygonal blocks fitted together without mortar in walls that had stood for 1,000 years before classical Greek civilization began. They called them Cyclopean, not as a metaphor, but as a classification. These were the works of Cyclopes, the only explanation that made sense. The term is still used. Modern architectural historians studying ancient stone construction across the Mediterranean basin use Cyclopean as a technical term for this style of fitting very large, irregular blocks together without mortar, relying on their own weight and the precision of their shaping for stability. The word has outlasted the belief system that gave it birth. The name of the builders has stayed attached to the work, long after the builders themselves became mythology. In Norse tradition, the world before the gods was shaped by the Jotnar, giants, but not giants in the simple fairy tale sense of very large people with the same desires and limitations as ordinary humans, just scaled upward. The Jotnar were made of different stuff, some of ice, some of fire, some of the deep stone of the earth before it was arranged into the familiar landscape we know. They were older than the gods. They existed before the order of things was established, in the chaos that preceded order. And some of that pre-orderly quality stayed in them. They could perceive and move through the world in ways that gods and humans, bound by the rules of the existing order, could not. Ymir was the first Jotun, the primordial giant from whose dismembered body the gods made the world. His flesh became the earth, his blood the seas, his bones the mountains. The stones, in this cosmology, are literally made of giant. When you place your hand on very old stone, you are placing it on the body of something that existed before the categories we use to understand existence. The Basque people of the mountains between France and Spain have their Gentilac, a race of giants who once shared the landscape with early humans. These were not savage creatures. The Gentilac built the stone monuments that still stand across the Basque country, the dolmens, the standing stones, the cairns that mark places where two kinds of time seem to press against each other. and they carried knowledge that ordinary human civilizations did not have. One Gentilak in particular, Basajaun, the lord of the forest, taught human beings how to cultivate grain, how to work metal, how to build in ways that would last. He shared the knowledge at the border between his world and theirs. And then he retreated into the ancient forest, into the deep shadow of trees that remembered the world before people were in it. There is a note in this tradition, in many of these traditions, of something freely given at the threshold. The giants who built, the knowledge they shared, the moment of contact between their world and ours. These are framed not as conquest, but as gift. The stone walls they built were not walls built against humans. They were walls built for whoever came after, whoever had the patience to look at them long enough to begin to wonder. In the traditions of Mesoamerica, the Aztecs spoke of the Quinametsin, a race of enormous beings who built Teotihuacan, the city where men become gods, long before the Aztecs arrived. The Quinametsin were powerful and accomplished, and they were destroyed because their power was not matched by their humility. The great city remained after them, a testament to what they could do and a warning about what they failed to understand. And in the Hebrew tradition, the Nephilim, whose name comes from the root naphal, to fall, were the children of angels who crossed the boundary between their world and the human world, and had children with the daughters of men. These hybrid beings, larger and stronger and in some sense more than human, appear in the book of Genesis, in the book of Enoch, in the Dead Sea Scrolls book of giants. The Roman Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, writing in the 1st century of the Common Era, recorded a tradition that the Nephilim had built enormous stone monuments before the Great Flood. Not out of arrogance, but out of prescient grief. They knew the flood was coming. They knew that almost everything they had built and understood and cared about would be erased. And so they built in stone, because stone was the only medium that could carry a message across the kind of distance that a global flood represents. They wanted whoever came after the water to know that someone had been here, that someone had thought about the future even as the future prepared to unmake them. These traditions are not evidence of the literal existence of giants. They are evidence of something subtler and perhaps more important, of a consistent human recognition across cultures and centuries that the scale of certain achievements exceeds what ordinary human limitation would predict. When the mind encounters something that should not be possible, it reaches for a frame large enough to contain it. The giant is not an explanation. The giant is the shape that mystery takes when it grows large enough to cast a shadow. And running alongside the tradition of giants, not identical to it, but touching it at certain points like two rivers approaching a junction, is the tradition of sound. In almost every culture where megaliths stand, there exists a parallel account. The stones were not moved by force alone. They were moved by resonance, by vibration, by some understanding of the relationship between sound and matter that our current civilization is only now beginning to approach from the direction of physics. The Arab historian Abu al-Hasan al-Masudi, one of the great scholars of the 10th century, sometimes called the Herodotus of the Arabs for the breadth and precision of his observations, traveled extensively before settling in Egypt. He was a careful man. He wrote 30 volumes of world history, and the portions that have survived are full of accurate observations confirmed by subsequent scholarship. His account of how the Egyptian pyramids were built is therefore not easy to dismiss as the fantasy of a careless mind. According to al-Masudi, the builders did not rely only on ramps and ropes. They placed beneath each stone to be moved a papyrus inscribed with specific symbols. They then struck the stone with a metal rod in a particular way, producing, we might now say, a specific frequency of vibration, and the stone rose. It moved along a pathway lined with metal posts, traveling approximately 160 meters before settling into position. The papyrus was removed. The stone stayed. Al-Masudi did not have a word for acoustic levitation. He did not have a theory of sound waves or resonance frequencies. He simply recorded what the tradition held to be true. With the same careful matter-of-factness he brought to his accounts of trade routes and political dynasties. From Tibet, a different account, recorded in the 20th century by the Swedish engineer Henry Kelson in his book The Lost Technique. His friend, a physician called Dr. Jarl, had treated a Tibetan holy man and been taken, in gratitude, to see something. In a meadow 250 meters from a steep cliff, a polished rock with a bowl-shaped depression at its center served as a kind of stage. Monks arranged themselves in a specific arc around the stone to be moved. 13 drums of varying sizes, 6 large trumpets. At a given signal, they began to play. The frequencies were specific. The arrangement was specific. After several minutes, the stone began to vibrate. Then it rose, tracing a slow arc through the thin, high-altitude air, and came to rest on the ledge above, joining the other stones of the structure being built on the cliff face. Dr. Jarl said he witnessed this multiple times. He filmed it. The film was confiscated. Modern physics approaches these accounts with the careful skepticism that careful skepticism requires, and then arrives at something interesting. Acoustic levitation is real. It is demonstrated in laboratories regularly, using sound waves to suspend small objects in midair. A joint British and Brazilian research team in 2016 successfully levitated a polystyrene ball 50 millimeters in diameter, larger than the wavelength of the sound used, for as long as the sound waves were generated. This matters because it shows that the phenomenon, at its principal level, is not constrained by the intuitive limits we might place on it. Scaling this effect to the mass of a megalithic block would require energies and technologies far beyond anything current science can produce. But what current science cannot produce is not the same as what has never existed. The universe is very old. Human civilization, in the form we recognize, is very young. What might have been understood in the long, unmapped centuries between the first use of fire and the first written word? The Great Pyramid of Giza has acoustic properties that its geometry alone cannot fully account for. Certain frequencies, when generated inside the king's chamber, are amplified in ways that continue to interest acoustic engineers and physicists. The pyramid resonates. Whether this was designed, whether it served a purpose, whether the resonance is connected to anything like what Al-Masudi described. These are questions that have not yet found conclusive answers. The stone hums, very quietly, at frequencies we cannot quite hear. Perhaps it always has. Perhaps this is what the legend of sound moving is carrying across the centuries. Not a literal description of a technology, but a metaphorical truth about the relationship between deep attention and apparently immovable things. When you attend to something with complete focus, with every instrument of perception fully engaged, with what we might call the full resonance of consciousness applied to a single point, things become possible that ordinary, partial attention cannot achieve. The monk striking the drum, the craftsman at the stone for the 40th consecutive hour, the engineer who has been turning a problem in her mind for so long that her dreaming mind has joined the working mind in the attempt. Something shifts. Something that was fixed becomes, briefly, movable. This is not mysticism. It is phenomenology. the careful description of what actually happens in human experience when the conditions are right. The giants and the sound movers may be pointing at the same thing from different directions. A capacity that is latent in the human, or perhaps in the relationship between the human and the material world, that requires conditions we have not yet fully understood how to create consistently, that appeared in certain cultures at certain moments of aligned attention and collective purpose, and that left behind, in stone, the evidence of its having been real. There is a word in Latin, monere, which means to remind. It is the heartwood of the word monument. Every monument ever built, in every culture on this earth, is at its core an act of reminding, a physical argument against forgetting, a statement made in the only language that can outlast the speaker. Consider what it means to build a monument. You are a human being, which makes you a creature of extraordinary intelligence and extraordinary fragility, held together by chemistry and electrical impulses and the ongoing cooperation of systems so complex that no individual mind has ever fully mapped them. You know, with a certainty that distinguishes you from almost every other creature that has shared this planet with your species, that you are going to die. Not as an abstract proposition, not as information received and filed away, as a lived awareness that colors everything you love, with the particular aching tenderness that comes only from knowing that it will end. And yet you build, not for next year, not even for the next generation, though that is part of it. You build for a future so distant from you that you cannot see it, cannot know it, cannot be certain it will exist. The people who shaped the trilithon stones of Baalbek did not live to see the Romans construct their temple on top of their work. The people of Tiwanaku, who cut the H-blocks of Puma Punku, did not live to see the Inca find the ruins centuries later and declare them the work of gods. Whoever built the first stones of Stonehenge did not live to see the astronomical calculations their alignment was designed to make possible. Whoever carved the face of Ramses into the cliff at Abu Simbel did not live to see the 20th century engineers who moved the entire temple, block by block, to save it from a dam. They built anyway. They built for a we so far in the future that it was purely hypothetical, an act of faith in the persistence of curiosity, in the continuity of the human project, in the existence of minds that would come later and stand where they stood and look at what they had made and feel the pull of the question embedded in the stone. You are that mind. You, in this quiet moment at the border of sleep, are the future they were building toward. They committed their best understanding to the only medium that could carry it this far. And here you are, receiving it across whatever distance of centuries separates your moment from theirs. This is not metaphor. This is the actual situation. The psychologist Erik Erikson, mapping the stages of human development through the middle of the 20th century, identified what he called generativity, the need, most urgent in the middle years of life, to contribute something to the world beyond one's own immediate circle and immediate time, to nurture, to create, to establish something that will persist and grow and matter after the individual who initiated it is gone. Erikson described this as a fundamental human drive, as deeply embedded in our nature as the drives for food and connection and understanding. The failure to find an outlet for generativity, he suggested, produces a particular kind of stagnation, a sense of meaninglessness that cannot be addressed by adding more pleasure or comfort or success to the individual life. Because the need it comes from is not about the individual life. The builders of Baalbek and Puma Punku and Stonehenge and the thousands of other megalithic sites scattered across the surface of the earth were being generative. They were expressing, in the most permanent medium available to them, the full force of what they understood about the world and their place in it. They were not building for themselves. They were building for the continuation of something: knowledge, relationship, sacred alignment, the memory of a story that they believed was too important to be allowed to end with them. Stone was the right choice. When the written word is lost, and it has been lost repeatedly across the history of civilizations that collapsed or were conquered or simply exhausted themselves and stopped, stone remains. The Library of Alexandria burned. The Linear A script of the Minoan civilization has never been deciphered, and the civilization that produced it vanished so completely that we do not even know what they called themselves. The languages of the Indus Valley cities, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, cities of remarkable urban planning and apparent sophistication, have not been decoded in more than a century of trying. The people who spoke them are beyond recovery. But the stones of Baalbek are still there. The H-blocks of Puma Punku are still there. They have held their shapes and their questions through the same centuries that erased the languages that might have explained them. When the digital record corrupts, and it corrupts steadily, as formats change and servers fail, and the infrastructure that maintains digital information requires constant care that declining civilizations cannot sustain, stone remains. The data of the early 21st century is already partially inaccessible. Formats that were standard a generation ago now require specialist software to read. The photographs your grandparents took on film may outlast the photographs you store in cloud services if the clouds ever stop being tended. Stone does not require tending. Stone does not require a power source. Stone does not require a platform that remains compatible with whatever comes next. There is a paradox at the center of this that the builders may have understood intuitively, even if they could not have articulated it in the terms we now have available. Neuroscientists studying the molecular mechanism of human memory have made an unsettling discovery. Memory is not a recording. It is not a film you can retrieve and replay unchanged. Every time you remember something, you alter it. In the act of retrieval, details are added that were not originally stored. Details are removed that were present but feel irrelevant now. The emotional coloring of the memory shifts to match the emotional state of the rememberer at the moment of retrieval. The molecular process of remembering is identical, at the cellular level, to the process of learning, which means that every remembering is simultaneously a remaking. Every remembering is also a forgetting. Stone does not do this. Stone holds what was placed on it without revision. The tool marks at Puma Punku do not change based on who is looking at them or what the observer needs the marks to mean. The fitted joints of the trilithon blocks do not shift to accommodate new interpretations. The precise angles of the H-block grooves are the same angles whether the observer is an archaeologist, a tourist, an engineer, or a dreaming mind reaching toward them across the centuries. The stone is a more reliable memory than any mind. More reliable, in this particular sense, than the best minds in the best conditions have ever been. It remembers without prejudice, without revision, without the subtle self-serving adjustments that make human memory so movingly unreliable and so thoroughly human. And yet, and this is the deep ache at the center of it, the stone can hold the what almost perfectly and the why almost not at all. We can measure the trilithon blocks to the millimeter. We cannot recover the prayer that was said when they were set in place. We know the precise angle of the dovetail grooves at Puma Punku. We cannot know the name of the craftsman who cut them, or what they were thinking about their children on the morning the groove reached its final depth, or whether they felt pride or exhaustion or something between those two things that doesn't have a word in any living language. We know the astronomical alignments of Stonehenge with a precision that would have satisfied the original builders. We cannot know what was said at the ceremonies that took place within those alignments, or what it felt like to stand inside that stone circle at the exact moment of the winter solstice sunrise, watching the light arrive in precisely the place it was built to arrive. The stone carries the body of the knowledge. The soul of the knowledge travels differently, in story, in dream, in legend, in the liminal space where waking dissolves, and what we know loosens its grip on what we feel. Perhaps this is why the great traditions of ancient builders are so consistently preserved in exactly these registers. In the half-world stories of giants and sounds and women who knew secrets they chose not to share. The explicit, demonstrable, measurable knowledge went into the stone. The implicit, lived, felt knowledge went into the dream. And both of them have arrived here, in your moment, on this quiet night. Think for a moment about what it means to leave something behind deliberately, not accidentally, the way a lost glove is left behind, or a misplaced key, or the fading memory of a conversation you thought you would remember. Deliberately, with full knowledge that you will not be there to explain it, to contextualize it, to answer the questions it will inevitably raise in whoever finds it. To trust the thing you have made to carry its own meaning across a distance you cannot see to its end. This is what the architects of Baalbek did. This is what the builders of Puma Punku did. They worked at the very limit of what was technically possible in their world. Worked with such precision and at such scale that even we, with all our tools and all our centuries of accumulated knowledge, cannot be entirely certain how they did it. And they committed the result to the care of a future they could not imagine. The monument's Latin root carries within it an implicit belief. A belief that the future will exist, that the future will contain minds capable of receiving the reminder, that those future minds will have the patience and the curiosity to stop in front of what has been left for them and ask the right question. The act of building a monument is an act of extraordinary faith in the persistence of human attention, a faith that some distant descendant will stand where you stood, look at what you made, and feel the pull of the question you embedded in the stone. You are that descendant. And here is perhaps the deepest thing. The question the builders embedded in their stones is not really about engineering. It is not really about ancient technologies or acoustic levitation or races of giants or the specific method by which an 800-ton block of limestone was moved across 800 meters and placed with the precision of a watch. These are all real questions, and they deserve real investigation, and they will eventually yield real answers. But they are the surface of the question, not its depth. The depth is this. What matters enough to build for eternity? What understanding, what relationship, what alignment between the human and the larger pattern of things is worth expressing in the most permanent medium available, at the greatest possible cost of effort, with no expectation of personal recognition or reward? What is it that drives a civilization to spend generations of collective labor on a structure that, by its very scale and permanence, declares, "This is what we understood. This is what we believed was worth the effort of perfect understanding. This is what we thought the future needed to know about us, or about the world, or about the relationship between the human and whatever it is that the human is embedded in." The builders of the megalithic world had an answer to that question. They expressed it in stone because stone was the most honest medium. It does not flatter, it does not deceive, it does not simplify. The stone is simply what it is, in the precise configuration it was placed in, for as long as the laws of physics allow it to stand. There is an integrity in that. a radical honesty. The builder who places a stone with a precision that exceeds the practical requirement by orders of magnitude. That builder is not trying to impress anyone. That builder is trying to be truthful, trying to say, this is exactly as good as we knew how to make it. No more, no less. The truth in stone. This is why we are still here, sitting with these stones, long after the civilizations that built them have dissolved back into the general archive of human time. Not because the stones are mysterious, though they are. Not because they are impressive, though they are. But because they carry, in the precision of their making and the permanence of their materials, the unmistakable quality of something made with full sincerity, something made for keeps, something that says, whoever you are, whenever you are, I was here and I thought this mattered, and I worked as well as I could, and I trusted you to come. There is a particular quality of silence that arrives when you sit with this understanding. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that sound cannot quite fill. A spaciousness in the chest, a loosening of the grip that ordinary thinking keeps on the moment. The kind of silence you find in very old cathedrals, or at the edge of very deep water, or in the specific darkness between very old stars. The builders knew this silence. They worked in it. They placed their stones in it. The precision of the joint, tighter than paper, tighter than breath, is the silence of something completed, something that has arrived at the place where it was going and rests there, perfectly, without the need for further adjustment. You don't have to solve the mystery tonight. You don't have to decide whether giants moved the stones or sound moved them, or 512 people with very good ropes moved them, or something else entirely that we haven't yet thought to consider. You don't have to reach an explanation or an opinion or a conclusion. The stones have been waiting for thousands of years. They will wait a little longer. Tonight, it is enough to feel what the stones are carrying across the distance. That immense, unhurried faithfulness to whatever they were built to say. That trust in the future. That willingness to put everything into the making of something that the maker would never see received. You have been seen? You are here. The act of reaching toward you worked. Let the weight of that settle into you like stone settles into the earth. Slowly, completely, without resistance. The valley is dark now. The high altiplano sky is full of the cold, brilliant stars that you can only really see from altitude. Somewhere in the Baca Valley, the remaining columns of the Temple of Jupiter are lit from below, the way important things sometimes are, and the trilithon blocks that no one can fully explain are doing what they have always done. Being there, being exactly what they are. Holding their joint with the quiet confidence of something that knows its place in the world and occupies it without apology. Here is another way to approach the question of why we build for eternity. Think not about the builders, but about the material itself. About what it means that stone, of all the things in the world, is the medium that has carried human intention across the longest distances of time. Stone began in fire. The limestone of Baalbek was once the accumulated shells and skeletons of marine organisms, compressed over millions of years into the pale, dense rock that the builders quarried and shaped and placed. The andesite of Puma Punku was once the liquid interior of Earth, cooling slowly into a crystalline structure so tight and hard that only something approaching its own hardness can mark it. Every stone was once something else. Every stone carries in its molecular structure the memory of a previous state, the heat, the pressure, the long, slow transformation from one form to another. In this sense, the stone already knew something about time before any human hand touched it. When a builder places a chisel against limestone and strikes it, produces the precise vibration that releases a chip of stone along a pre-existing fracture line, guided by an understanding of the stone's internal structure that comes from long practice and fine attention. Something interesting is happening at the level of physics. The human intention, expressed through the organized motion of hand and arm and eye, and the accumulated knowledge held in muscle memory, is interacting with the crystalline structure of the stone at the level of molecular bonds. The strike that produces a clean chip rather than a random fracture requires that the tool meet the stone at a specific angle, with a specific force, at a specific point along the grain. This is knowledge about the stone's nature, its preferences almost, its specific way of being the thing it is. The craftsman who can read this and respond to it correctly is in a relationship with the stone, a conversation between the human intention and the stone's inherent structure. This is not mysticism, but it is not entirely separate from what the traditions about sound and resonance are pointing at either. The best craftsmen across the history of stone working have described their relationship to the material in terms that go beyond mere technical knowledge. They speak of listening to the stone, of learning what it wants to be, of finding the form that is already inside it, rather than imposing a form from outside. Michelangelo, who was himself an extraordinary stone worker as well as a sculptor, said something like this: "Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it." He was not speaking entirely metaphorically. What if the traditions of acoustic stone moving are preserving, in the only language the non-literate past had available, the language of miracle and wonder, the memory of a much more intimate and sophisticated understanding of stone's material properties? Not magic, not miracles, but a knowledge so refined, so practiced, so fully integrated into the body of the practitioner, that from the outside it looked like something impossible, like something that could only be explained by the intervention of sound, of resonance, of a vibration more fundamental than the visible motions of human muscle. What has been lost is not necessarily supernatural. What has been lost may simply be a way of attending, a depth of relationship between the human and the material world, between mind and stone, between intention and matter. That our civilization of metal tools and powered machines no longer needs in the same way, and has therefore not cultivated, and has therefore not transmitted. The knowledge went into the stone in the form of precision. The method of arriving at that precision has not yet been fully recovered. There is something in the scale of these structures that also deserves to be held, beyond the engineering question. Something about the relationship between the individual life and the collective project. No single person built Baalbek. No single person quarried the trilithon blocks, shaped them, moved them, placed them. This was the work of many lives, coordinated across what may have been generations, a project whose beginning was in living memory and whose completion was not. The person who struck the first cut into the limestone that would become the stone of the pregnant woman did not live to see it fail to reach the temple. The person who placed the trilithon blocks in position had not been alive when the quarrying began. And everyone who participated in between, who carried, who organized, who fed the workers, who maintained the tools, who taught the apprentices, who held the knowledge of why this particular alignment mattered. All of them were investing their days and years into something they understood would outlast them by an order of magnitude. This is a particular kind of hope, not the hope that things will be better for me or for my children, though that hope was almost certainly present too. The hope that what we are doing is worth doing on a time scale longer than any individual life can observe. The hope that the project is real, that the understanding is true, that the future will need what we are building, even if the future cannot yet be seen. The word hope in this context carries a weight that ordinary usage has somewhat rubbed smooth. In its older sense, hope is not optimism, not the light, sometimes thoughtless expectation that things will be pleasant. Hope is an orientation toward a future you cannot see, made on the basis of values you have decided to trust. Hope is the decision to act as though the future will be the kind of place where the thing you are making will matter. The builders of the megalithic world hoped, and their hope is still here in the stone. You can touch it if you go to those places. You can put your hand on the joint between the trilithon blocks and feel, in the precise absence of a gap, the hope of people who worked with everything they had for a future they could only imagine. This is the conversation the stones have been waiting to have. Not about engineering, about hope, about what it means to be a creature that knows it will die and builds anyway. Builds not in spite of the dying, but somehow because of it. Because the knowledge of finitude is also the knowledge of what matters, and what matters is worth giving your days to, even if your days are all you have. You are such a creature, right now, in this moment between waking and sleep, where the ordinary armor of the practical mind grows thin and the deeper things have room to speak. The builders of Baalbek and Puma Punku and Stonehenge and Gobekli Tepe and the thousands of other stone-heavy places scattered across the surface of this beautiful and astonishing world. They were such creatures too. They looked at the raw materials of the earth, and they saw, in those materials, the possibility of saying something true in the most permanent way available. And they gave their working lives to the saying of it. What they said is still here. You are still hearing it. You will be forgotten. Your name will become silence, in the way that all names eventually do. The specific geometry of everything you love, the particular laugh, the familiar weight, the private geography of your own most important country. All of it will pass the way the Tiwanaku civilization passed, into the long, undifferentiated quiet of the deep past. And that is all right. Because the thing that drove those ancient hands to lift what should not be liftable, to fit what should not be fittable, to insist on a precision that the moment did not require, that thing was not the name. It was the reaching, the act of extending toward a future you would never see, with the best you had to offer, trusting that it would matter to someone someday, in the way that things made with full sincerity always matter, even when the context that gave them meaning is long gone. The stone carries that reaching, even across the silence of millennia, even when the hands that made it are dust and the language that named it is lost, and the civilization that dreamed it has scattered into the wind. Even now, as you move toward the border of sleep, the stone is still here, still fitted with its ancient precision, still occupying its exact place with perfect confidence, still carrying the question that all questions eventually become, when you follow them far enough toward the center. What, in this brief and luminous life, is worth building with everything you have? You don't have to answer that tonight. The question will keep the way stone keeps. Let it settle into the deep quiet of your dreaming and wait there, patient as limestone, patient as the Bekaa Valley, patient as the high Bolivian sky above the scattered ruins of the Gate of the Puma. Sleep now. The stone will keep, and somewhere in the rich and particular silence of your dreaming, something very old may lean close and begin, in its own time, in its own way, to answer. Good night. You have been listening to Midnight Sleep Chronicles. Tonight's journey took us to Baalbek in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon. where stones weighing as much as 1,650 tons were shaped and placed with a precision that continues to resist full explanation. And to Puma Punku on the Bolivian Altiplano, where H-shaped blocks of volcanic andesite carry right angles and dovetail grooves that speak of knowledge we have not yet fully recovered. We asked why our ancestors felt compelled to build at this scale, with this devotion to precision, for a future they would never see. We listened to the legends of giants and of sound, of Cyclopes and Nephilim, and Gentilak and Tibetan monks, all of whom are pointing from different directions at the same gap between what ordinary human effort can explain and what the evidence requires us to account for. And we sat for a while in the particular silence of things made with complete sincerity. Things built not for the builder, but for the inheritor. If any of this has settled into a question inside you, if you know a place where you have felt the weight of deep time pressing up through ordinary ground, we would be glad to hear about it in the comments. Perhaps there is somewhere on this earth that you feel drawn to in a way you cannot entirely explain. We carry these questions together. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and remember, the archives are always open.